From a Harvard dorm room experiment to one of the most influential and controversial companies in human history, Facebook changed the way billions of people communicate, share, and consume information. It promised to connect the world, but somewhere along the way, the lines between innovation and intrusion began to blur. What started as a digital playground for college students became a political battlefield, a marketing goldmine, and a privacy nightmare. Behind the smiling blue logo lies a story of relentless ambition, corporate dominance, and a series of scandals so massive they shook governments, destroyed reputations, and left users wondering if they had traded their privacy for convenience. From secret algorithms that decide what you see to accusations of swaying elections to billion-dollar fines for mishandling personal data, Facebook has faced battles that would have crushed lesser companies, yet it continues to grow. But survival comes at a cost, and the cracks in its once untouchable empire are showing. Today, as it rebrands to Meta and pushes into a risky bet on virtual reality, the ghosts of its past scandals still haunt every move. This is the untold story of Facebook's rise, its most dangerous controversies, and how the very platform that connected us all might be on the edge of losing the trust it desperately needs to survive. Facebook's story begins in 2004 inside a cramped Harvard dorm room where a 19-year-old Mark Zuckerberg and his roommates launched the Facebook as an exclusive online directory for Ivy League students. At the time, the internet was fragmented with personal blogs, scattered chat rooms, and email chains dominating digital communication. Zuckerberg's creation was different. It offered a centralized place where users could not only connect with friends, but also display their social lives in real time. It was simple, addictive, and unlike anything else on the web. Within weeks, it spread beyond Harvard to other universities, then across the United States, and eventually the world. By 2006, Facebook opened its doors to anyone with an email address, a move that transformed it from a campus novelty into a global phenomenon. The platform's growth was fueled by a deceptively straightforward formula. Give users free access, collect their data, and monetize it through targeted advertising. That model would become the foundation of a trillion-dollar empire. The turning point came when Facebook introduced the newsfeed in 2006, a feature that organized posts, photos, and updates into a continuous, personalized scroll. It was revolutionary, but also controversial. Users initially protested, calling it invasive, but they quickly adapted. The newsfeed became the heartbeat of the platform, powered by algorithms that learned users' preferences and served them content designed to keep them engaged for as long as possible. What appeared to be a harmless convenience was in reality the first step in Facebook's mastery of attention manipulation. By the early 2010s, Facebook wasn't just a social network, it was the social network. It had surpassed MySpace, dethroned Friendster, and outmaneuvered every other competitor. Strategic acquisitions only strengthened its grip. In 2012, it purchased Instagram for $1 billion, securing dominance among younger audiences who were shifting toward mobile photo sharing. 2 years later, it acquired WhatsApp for $19 billion, gaining access to one of the largest messaging platforms on Earth. These moves expanded Facebook's reach into nearly every corner of the digital communication landscape, creating a near monopoly on social interaction. Its influence was no longer confined to friendships and family updates. Businesses relied on it for marketing political campaigns, saw it as a vital tool for mobilizing supporters, and media outlets depended on it to drive traffic. In many parts of the world, Facebook wasn't just a website, it was the internet. In countries like the Philippines, India, and Myanmar, Facebook's Free Basics program offered limited internet access centered entirely on its platform, effectively making it the gatekeeper of online information for millions. Yet this meteoric rise carried an undercurrent of risk. The more Facebook embedded itself into daily life, the more power it accumulated over the flow of information. Every like, share, and comment was stored, analyzed, and monetized. While most users saw harmless customization behind the scenes, vast data profiles were being built. Profiles that could reveal political leanings, personal habits, shopping preferences, and even intimate secrets. By the mid-2000s, Facebook had become one of the most profitable companies in the world, earning tens of billions annually from advertisers eager to tap into its unparalleled data troves. But unchecked growth breeds enemies. Governments began to question its influence, regulators scrutinized its dominance, and journalists dug into the hidden mechanics of its business model. As the platform's power grew, so did its list of critics. And soon, one scandal would erupt that not only exposed the vulnerabilities in Facebook's system, but also threatened to dismantle the public trust it had built over a decade. That scandal would forever change the way the world viewed the company, and it all began with a name that would become infamous: Cambridge Analytica. The Cambridge Analytica scandal wasn't just a public relations nightmare for Facebook. It was a moment that peeled back the polished blue and white surface to reveal the darker machinery underneath. The story began in 2014, when a seemingly harmless personality quiz called "This Is Your Digital Life" appeared on the platform. Created by researcher Alexander Kogan, the app asked users a series of lighthearted psychological questions, promising to generate fun personality profiles in return. But hidden in its code was a powerful data harvesting tool. At the time, Facebook's API policies allowed apps not only to collect the personal information of those who installed them, but also to access data from all their friends without their consent. Roughly 270,000 users took the quiz, but through the interconnected nature of Facebook's social graph, the app vacuumed up data from more than 87 million profiles. This information included names, locations, likes, friend networks, and in some cases, private messages. That data was then sold to Cambridge Analytica, a political consulting firm with a mission to weaponize personal information for targeted political advertising. Using complex algorithms, Cambridge Analytica claimed it could predict a person's political views, fears, and even emotional triggers, crafting hyper-personalized ads designed to sway opinion and influence voting behavior. The firm's fingerprints were found in campaigns around the world, but the most infamous connection was the 2016 US presidential election. While Facebook denied direct involvement, the revelations that Cambridge Analytica had used its platform to micro-target voters on a massive scale ignited a firestorm. Critics accused Facebook of enabling political manipulation on an unprecedented level, turning the platform into a digital weapon capable of shaping the fate of nations. When the scandal broke in 2018, thanks to whistleblower Christopher Wiley's explosive testimony and a joint investigation by The Guardian, The Observer, and The New York Times, the public outrage was immediate. Users launched the Socket Reduce Delete Facebook campaign. Stock prices plummeted, and for the first time in its history, Facebook faced the real possibility of mass user abandonment. Lawmakers summoned Mark Zuckerberg to testify before Congress, leading to the now iconic image of the CEO sitting stiffly in a suit, delivering carefully rehearsed answers as senators grilled him on privacy data protection and corporate responsibility. His performance did little to silence critics. Internally, the company scrambled to limit the damage. It tightened data sharing policies, shut down access for thousands of third-party apps, and implemented new privacy settings. But for many, these measures felt like too little too late. The scandal had already cemented a new perception of Facebook, not as a friendly platform for sharing life's moments, but as a surveillance giant with the power to manipulate reality. The fallout wasn't just reputational. In 2019, the U.S. Federal Trade Commission fined Facebook a record $5 billion for violating users' privacy. While it was the largest fine in FTC history, it represented just a fraction of Facebook's annual revenue, leading critics to argue it was little more than a slap on the wrist. The company also faced lawsuits and regulatory probes in the UK, Canada, and the European Union, with the EU's General Data Protection Regulation (GDPR) setting new legal standards for how data could be collected and used. Perhaps most damaging was the erosion of trust. For years, Facebook's growth had been fueled by the implicit belief that the platform was a safe place to connect. Now users were asking uncomfortable questions. How much did Facebook know about them? Who else had access to that information? And could they ever truly control their digital footprint? The Cambridge Analytica scandal became a turning point, not just for Facebook, but for the tech industry as a whole. It sparked a global conversation about privacy ethics and the hidden power of algorithms. Other tech giants, Google, Twitter, even Apple, found themselves under similar scrutiny. But Facebook remained the primary villain in the public imagination, in part because it had become so deeply embedded in everyday life. People could quit Twitter or avoid Google products, but walking away from Facebook meant severing ties with friends, family, and communities. Yet, even as the scandal raged, Facebook's user base continued to grow. The company weathered the storm financially, posting record revenues in the years that followed. But the damage lingered. Politicians across the globe began pushing for stricter regulations, activists demanded more transparency, and journalists kept digging into the platform's opaque systems. The Cambridge Analytica chapter closed with fines, hearings, and apologies, but the fundamental questions it raised never truly went away. And as the world would soon discover, Cambridge Analytica was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Behind the scenes, Facebook was facing another crisis, this time centered not on stolen data, but on the content flowing through its platform. What began as a debate about privacy was about to evolve into a fierce battle over truth itself. If the Cambridge Analytica scandal exposed Facebook's reckless handling of personal data, the next crisis revealed something even more dangerous: its ability to shape reality itself. In the years following 2016, researchers, journalists, and lawmakers began uncovering just how deeply misinformation had taken root on the platform. What they found was alarming. Facebook's algorithm, designed to maximize engagement, wasn't neutral. It prioritized content that sparked strong emotions, especially anger and fear. Posts containing sensational claims, conspiracy theories, or polarizing political rhetoric tended to spread faster than factual reporting. This wasn't a bug. It was the system working exactly as intended. During the 2016 U.S. presidential election, Russian operatives from the Internet Research Agency (IRA) exploited Facebook's ad platform and fake accounts to push divisive narratives targeting Americans based on race, religion, and political affiliation. Facebook initially downplayed the scope of the operation, but later admitted that as many as 126 million users had been exposed to content from these fake pages. The revelations prompted accusations that Facebook had become a willing conduit for foreign interference, eroding public trust in democratic institutions. The problem wasn't confined to the United States. In countries like Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and the Philippines, Facebook's reach had outpaced local media infrastructure, turning it into the primary source of news for millions. In Myanmar, human rights groups accused Facebook of playing a central role in inciting violence against the Rohingya Muslim minority. Hate speech and inflammatory posts spread unchecked for months, contributing to a humanitarian crisis that forced hundreds of thousands to flee their homes. The United Nations later concluded that Facebook had been too slow to prevent the spread of hate. Under mounting pressure, Facebook rolled out fact-checking programs, content moderation teams, and AI tools designed to detect false information. But these measures introduced a new controversy: accusations of censorship. Conservatives in the United States claimed Facebook was suppressing right-leaning voices, while activists in authoritarian countries argued that the company was complicit in silencing dissent. Zuckerberg insisted the platform was politically neutral, but leaked internal documents later published as part of the Facebook papers in 2021 painted a more complex picture. They revealed that executives were aware of the algorithm's bias toward divisive content and debated internally about whether changing it would hurt engagement and revenue. The 2020 U.S. presidential election brought the issue to a boiling point. In the months leading up to the vote, Facebook struggled to contain a flood of misinformation about mail-in ballots, COVID-19, and political conspiracies. After Election Day, the platform became a breeding ground for the false claim that the election had been stolen. Groups promoting the Stop the Steal movement organized rallies through Facebook events, some of which culminated in violence. When the January 6th Capitol riot unfolded, investigators found that many participants had used Facebook to coordinate travel-share extremist content and spread incendiary rhetoric. The backlash was swift. Lawmakers accused Facebook of failing to act decisively. Advertisers launched boycotts under the banner "Stop Hate for Profit," and even some former employees publicly criticized the company's priorities. In a Senate hearing, whistleblower Frances Haugen delivered damning testimony alleging that Facebook consistently chose profits over safety and ignored its own research showing the harm caused by its platforms. Her leaks included internal studies documenting the mental health impact of Instagram on teenagers, as well as evidence that the algorithm rewarded extreme content because it kept people scrolling. Globally, the company's struggle to balance free expression with harm prevention became a legal battlefield. The European Union began enforcing stricter content moderation laws under its Digital Services Act, while countries like India threatened to ban Facebook entirely unless it complied with government takedown requests. Critics argued that Facebook's responses were inconsistent, bending to authoritarian demands in some markets while claiming a commitment to free speech in others. The public perception of Facebook shifted dramatically during this period. Once seen as a symbol of digital innovation, it was increasingly viewed as a chaotic amplifier of the worst aspects of human behavior. For many users, the platform's role in spreading conspiracy theories, undermining public health messaging during the pandemic, and fueling political violence was unforgivable. Still, Facebook remained defiant in its stance that it was merely a platform, not a publisher, and therefore not responsible for every piece of content posted by its billions of users. But that defense was wearing thin. Governments were drafting new regulations to hold tech companies accountable, and Facebook knew it was no longer operating in an era of unchallenged growth. The next phase of its troubles wouldn't just be about reputation. It would involve existential legal and business threats that could dismantle the very empire Zuckerberg had built. By the time the misinformation crises reached their peak, Facebook was already under siege from another front: accusations that it had grown too powerful for the good of the internet or democracy itself. Critics argued that the company had achieved a level of dominance that stifled competition, controlled the flow of information, and gave it disproportionate influence over society. In December 2020, the U.S. Federal Trade Commission, along with 48 state attorneys general, filed a landmark antitrust lawsuit against Facebook. The core allegation was simple but devastating. Facebook had systematically eliminated competition through a buy or bury strategy. If a rival platform posed a threat, Facebook either acquired it, as it did with Instagram and WhatsApp, or copied its features so aggressively that the competitor couldn't survive. The lawsuit sought a radical remedy to break up the company by forcing it to divest Instagram and WhatsApp. Zuckerberg pushed back, claiming these acquisitions had made the apps better and more secure, not less competitive. But internal emails made public during the investigation showed executives discussing the need to neutralize potential rivals before they could grow into serious threats. To regulators, these exchanges were smoking gun evidence of monopolistic intent. The legal pressure wasn't confined to the United States. In the European Union, antitrust chief Margrethe Vestager launched multiple investigations into Facebook's business practices, including whether it unfairly used advertising data from competitors to gain an advantage. In Australia, a bitter standoff erupted in 2021 when the government proposed a law requiring tech giants to pay news organizations for content shared on their platforms. Facebook responded by temporarily blocking all news content in the country, a move that accidentally cut off access to emergency services and public health updates during a pandemic. The backlash was swift, and Facebook ultimately struck a deal, but the incident reinforced the perception of the company as an unaccountable corporate giant willing to flex its power against entire nations. Inside Facebook's headquarters, known as the MPK campus in Menlo Park, the pressure was mounting. Employees were divided over the company's direction. Some engineers and policy staff argued for sweeping changes to algorithms, stronger moderation tools, and greater transparency. Others worried that too much intervention would alienate users and hurt profits. Leaks from internal message boards painted a picture of a workforce increasingly at odds with its leadership, with some employees accusing executives of moral cowardice. The tension wasn't just ideological, it was financial. Apple's introduction of app tracking transparency in 2021 allowed iPhone users to block apps from tracking their activity across other sites and apps, striking at the heart of Facebook's targeted advertising model. The change was a gut punch. By 2022, Meta projected it would lose more than $10 billion in annual revenue as a direct result. Investors began to question whether the company's ad-driven business could withstand growing privacy regulations. Public opinion, meanwhile, continued to sour. Surveys showed trust in Facebook had plummeted, especially among younger demographics who were gravitating toward TikTok, Snapchat, and other emerging platforms. In response, Facebook rebranded itself as Meta Platforms in late 2021, signaling a pivot toward the metaverse, a bold, risky gamble on virtual and augmented reality as the next frontier of the internet. But to many, the timing felt suspicious. Critics saw it as a desperate attempt to distract from scandals and regulatory threats, a corporate sleight of hand meant to reframe the conversation before the antitrust cases gained momentum. While Zuckerberg maintained that Meta was building the future, the lawsuits and investigations continued to advance. In 2022, a U.S. judge allowed the FTC's revised antitrust case to proceed, ensuring that the breakup threat would linger for years. The European Union passed the Digital Markets Act, placing new restrictions on gatekeeper companies like Meta, including limits on how they could combine user data across services. Other nations were crafting their own versions of tech regulation, effectively surrounding Facebook with a tightening legal noose. Even the company's closest allies were growing wary. Advertisers, once the lifeblood of Facebook's revenue, became more cautious, unwilling to be associated with a brand that seemed perpetually mired in controversy. Civil rights groups continued to push for stricter moderation of hate speech and misinformation, while free speech advocates warned that overcorrection could chill legitimate discourse. The balancing act was becoming nearly impossible. As 2022 bled into 2023, one thing was clear: Facebook was no longer the untouchable juggernaut it had been in the early 2010s. Its business model was under attack from regulators, its reputation was battered by years of scandals, and its employees were divided over how or even whether it could fix itself. And yet, the most radical transformation of the company's identity was still to come, one that would take it far beyond the social networking roots that had made it a household name. This next chapter would hinge on Zuckerberg's most ambitious bet, yet the metaverse. When Mark Zuckerberg took the stage at the company's annual Connect conference in October 2021, the announcement was framed as the beginning of a new era. Facebook, he declared, would now be known as Meta Platforms, a name meant to reflect its future beyond social media. The centerpiece of this vision was the metaverse, a fully immersive digital world where people could work, play, shop, and socialize through virtual and augmented reality. To Zuckerberg, this wasn't just a product shift. It was the next evolution of the Internet, one that would eventually replace the flat screens of phones and computers with a persistent 3D environment. The rebrand was ambitious, but it was also widely seen as a strategic pivot away from years of scandal. Critics accused Zuckerberg of using the metaverse narrative to escape Facebook's toxic public image and distract from mounting regulatory scrutiny. Still, Meta poured billions into building this future, primarily through its Reality Labs division, which developed the Oculus, later Meta Quest line of VR headsets and the Horizon Worlds virtual platform. By 2022, the company was spending more than $10 billion annually on metaverse-related projects, even as its core advertising business faced headwinds. Zuckerberg envisioned the metaverse as an interconnected network of digital spaces where avatars could move seamlessly between work meetings, concerts, gaming sessions, and virtual storefronts. He spoke of a world where physical distance no longer mattered, where entire economies could emerge in virtual space, and where Meta could take a leadership role in defining the new digital infrastructure. But the reality of the metaverse was far less glamorous. Early users complained about Horizon Worlds' empty environments, clunky controls, and cartoonish graphics. Adoption was slow, with most activity coming from niche gaming communities rather than the mainstream audience Meta hoped to capture. Meanwhile, the company's financial performance began to suffer. In 2022, Meta reported its first-ever year-over-year revenue decline, and stock prices plunged by more than 70% from their 2021 peak. Investors openly questioned whether the metaverse bet was worth the staggering costs. Analysts pointed out that while Zuckerberg was fixated on a future that might be a decade away, the present was slipping out of his hands. TikTok was dominating short-form video. Younger users were abandoning Facebook entirely, and Instagram was struggling to reinvent itself to compete. Internally, morale took a hit. In late 2022, Meta announced the largest layoffs in its history, cutting more than 11,000 jobs, about 13% of its workforce. A second round of layoffs in 2023 eliminated thousands more positions, many from Reality Labs. Employees spoke of a culture of uncertainty, with some questioning whether the company's leadership truly understood what the metaverse's mainstream appeal would be. Zuckerberg defended the cuts as part of a year of efficiencies, insisting that Meta had to streamline operations to survive the economic downturn and keep funding its long-term vision. Outside the company, the metaverse concept faced broader skepticism. Tech journalists mocked its awkward avatars and lack of compelling experiences. Privacy advocates warned that VR and AR technologies could collect even more invasive data than smartphones tracking eye movements, facial expressions, and physical gestures. Regulators began exploring how existing laws might apply to immersive environments, raising the possibility of new compliance burdens before the metaverse had even taken shape. Yet Zuckerberg remained undeterred. He compared Meta's metaverse push to the early days of the mobile internet, arguing that those who built the foundations would reap the rewards for decades. Meta doubled down on developing the next generation of headsets, including the Quest Pro, aimed at professionals and mixed reality applications. The company also invested heavily in AI tools to make virtual environments more realistic, personalized, and interactive. But the gamble carried existential risk. If the metaverse failed to catch on with consumers, Meta could be left with billions in sunk costs and a weakened core business. Advertisers who made up more than 97% of Meta's revenue were already shifting budgets toward platforms with higher engagement and clearer returns. Competitors like Apple and Microsoft were developing their own AR/VR ecosystems, threatening to sideline Meta's vision before it became dominant. By 2024, the Metaverse project stood at a crossroads. On one hand, Meta had built an unmatched technological infrastructure and positioned itself as the most committed player in the field. On the other, it had yet to convince the public or Wall Street that this was the future they wanted. The company's survival now hinged on a delicate balance, maintaining its dominance in social media while betting its future on a world that still existed mostly in concept. For Zuckerberg, the metaverse was more than a business strategy. It was a legacy project, a chance to redefine his company's place in history after years of controversy. But for critics, it was a high-stakes distraction, one that might hasten Meta's decline if the gamble failed. And as the company moved deeper into uncharted territory, one question lingered over every investor call, every product launch, and every policy decision. Was this bold leap into the virtual world the start of Meta's redemption, or the final chapter of Facebook's long fall from grace? From its meteoric rise in a Harvard dorm to becoming a near untouchable giant, Facebook's journey has been nothing short of extraordinary and controversial. It connected billion-shaped elections, disrupted industries, and redefined how humanity communicates. But that same power became its greatest liability. The Cambridge Analytica scandal shattered the illusion of privacy. Misinformation and extremism turned the platform into a political battleground. Antitrust lawsuits painted it as a monopolistic force strangling competition. And now, in the era of Meta, it faces a gamble so massive it could either secure its future or accelerate its collapse. For all its missteps, Facebook, now Meta, remains one of the most influential companies in the world. Billions still log in to its apps daily, willingly or reluctantly, and its grip on global communication is unmatched. Yet the landscape has changed. Competitors are faster. Younger users are more elusive. Regulators are more aggressive, and public trust is fractured. Every decision Meta makes from here on will be judged not just by its shareholders, but by governments, watchdogs, and a user base that has learned to be skeptical. Mark Zuckerberg's vision of a boundless digital frontier might one day be realized, or it may become a cautionary tale about ambition outpacing reality. Either way, the company's next moves will determine whether Meta is remembered as the architect of the next internet, or as the empire that crumbled under the weight of its own hubris. In the end, the question isn't just whether Meta can survive, but whether it can win back the one thing it has been steadily losing for over a decade: the world's trust.